Hello, my name is Stephanie Shapiro. Today is Tuesday, July 14th, 2020, and this is my Unit 2 Case Connection video. For the case connection, I have chosen to analyze cases 3 and 4. I'll start by reading case number 3. A 5-year-old boy is brought to the pediatrician's office for an annual visit. The mother reports that he has been a sickly infant and often appears drowsy. She also has concerns over her son's persistent thirst and frequent urination. Blood samples are taken for insulin measurements and at time 0 and 1 hour after a glucose loading test. The results of the test are illustrated in this table. The table reads that the baseline blood sample for the patient, the 5-year-old boy, is 0.8, and the control for the baseline blood sample is 6 plus or minus 2. 1 hour after the glucose load, the patient's serum insulin levels were 5, whereas the control is 40 plus or minus 11. So as you can tell, his numbers are quite a bit off from the control. So the first question that we're asked to address is, what is the information likely to suggest about the underlying biochemical basis for the patient's symptoms? So I'll start by analyzing the patient's case. Based on the symptoms described and the results of the insulin test I just read to you, the 5-year-old boy is likely to have type 1 diabetes. The patient's experiencing drowsiness, persistent thirst, and frequent urination. These are all indicative of an insulin deficiency and hyperglycemia as a result. The reason that these symptoms are associated with type 1 diabetes is that the body doesn't know how to properly produce glucose obtained through food, so the glucose levels build up in the blood, and then it forces the kidneys to work extra hard in an effort to filter the blood to flush out the excess glucose. So it triggers frequent urination and thus thirst. The patient, as I stated earlier, has significantly low insulin levels based on the test that was run. And that's both before and after the glucose load. So the patient is insulin dependent. The next question asked is, what would you predict the patient's fasted blood glucose levels to be given his current condition? The patient's blood glucose levels will likely be above normal. This is because he has an insulin deficiency, so his pancreas isn't producing the proper levels of insulin required to balance out the high glucose levels that are resulting from his hyperglycemia. The next question is, list 2 regulatory enzymes that are likely to be active in this individual's current condition. 2 of the regulatory enzymes likely to be active are hexokinase and pyruvate kinase. These are both catalysts in the process of glycolysis, which is the breakdown of glucose, which, as you could imagine, would be really important in a patient with high glucose levels. The next case is case 4, and I'll read that one to you as well. A previously healthy 2-month-old female presents with jittery spells several hours after breastfeeding. Her mother reports that she has not given the baby anything to eat other than breast milk since birth. The baby has only recently been sleeping for more than 2 hours between feedings, and that's when the mother reports these symptoms started. Laboratory results are consistent with hypoglycemia, low blood glucose, but are otherwise unremarkable. Epinephrine is administered, and there is no increase in blood glucose, but there is an increase in blood lactate. Physical exam reveals a liver edge 4 centimeters below the right costal margin. Percussion of the right chest and abdomen confirms hematomegaly, an enlarged liver. Blood glucose levels increase after breastfeeding, but she cannot maintain blood glucose levels within a normal range during fasting. So the first question is, based on the information above, which of the following is the most likely diagnosis for this patient? The options to choose from are hereditary fructose intolerance, galactosemia, glycogen storage disease, or the inability to use glycogen, or glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Based on the case and the symptoms listed, the patient is likely experiencing glycogen storage disease, the inability to use glycogen. While there are a variety of types of this disease, they are primarily characterized by effects on the liver and/or muscles. The patient in this case is experiencing an enlarged liver. She's also experiencing high glucose levels following feeding. You know that because of the jitters that she's experiencing several hours after breastfeeding, which is a common indicator of hypoglycemia. And that's also been confirmed by her lab results. The patient's blood glucose levels then rise after eating, but she's unable to maintain a healthy level when fasting. That's another sign of glycogen storage disease. This is because the glucose naturally produced by the body is being suppressed in the period after eating, whereas the glucose obtained externally through food or breast milk is being metabolized into lactate through the Cori cycle. Lactate acts as an alternative source of energy when the patient is in a hypoglycemic state. The patient's increase in blood lactate following the administration of the epinephrine, which was discussed in the case, indicates that the condition, it indicates that the body is working to produce an alternative fuel source because of the hypoglycemic state. Now, that's why it is glucose storage disease. Let's talk about why it's not the other options. So, option A was hereditary fructose intolerance. Typically, hereditary fructose intolerance is discovered when a baby is first being introduced to fructose and sucrose containing foods when being weaned off of breast milk. Now, the mother states that this baby has exclusively been consuming breast milk since its birth. So that's not the likely case. Also, the symptoms of that condition include nausea, vomiting, and abdominal distress, none of which the baby seems to be experiencing. The next option was galactosemia, which is typically detected by problems with feeding and liver failure. Now, while the patient is experiencing an enlarged liver, she is not experiencing liver failure, and she's not having any trouble with feeding. And the other option was glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Now, this typically presents as neonatal jaundice, which is a yellowing of the skin, and acute hemolytic anemia. Baby's not experiencing either one of those from what we know. There was no mention of the baby having any skin discoloration, and the blood tests, other than the hypoglycemia, were unremarkable according to the case study. So there's no reason to believe that the baby is experiencing any of these other three conditions. Thank you.